So, John Shaw, we're in Congress again, 2 months into the Trump presidency. What can we say about the leadership in the US at the moment after these 2 months?
I think the term might be exhausting. It's the country has gone through quite a transfer of power. Just several months ago, Barack Obama stepped down. A leadership style that I think was quiet, understated, thoughtful, intellectual, has been replaced by an impulsive, aggressive, combative, I think undisciplined approach to leadership. And as we spoke, months ago, it was unclear what Donald Trump was going to assume the presidency. During the campaign, he was an aggressive, combative, divisive figure. And as he came to the presidency, it was unclear if he was going to moderate his behavior, try to be a more conciliatory leader. But so far he hasn't. Particularly his rhetoric has been extremely sharp and harsh. And he is, I think he continues to enjoy significant support from Republicans, but Democrats are almost to the person against him. I think independents are very concerned about his leadership style. And I think that's probably it. More than anything else, I think there are concerns about his policies. His policies are controversial. But I think more than anything, there's real concern about his temperament, because he is this very volatile, impulsive, impetuous person who likes to go on the attack. And if you're a governor from a small state, that's sort of okay, but when you're the president of the United States, there's some real consequences to that kind of behavior.
But John, there's a lot of talk about fake news in the media and so on from the Trump people and from the president himself. And then from his opposition, a lot of people talk about that he's lying, that he's the one delivering fake information.
Yeah.
What happens when there is such a debate about the president? I mean, he's being called a liar by big media and important figures in this country. Has this happened before?
Not in my lifetime. I mean, and I think that's sort of where the exhaustion comes in, because, in past presidencies, the leader at least made an attempt to provide factual, accurate information, and from that base you could argue about the merits of policy. But Trump's approach is to just sort of say what he wants, and without any even glancing effort to have it confirmed by independent studies or factual analysis. And it just creates, it's hard even to have a legitimate policy debate where, he just sort of says what he wants to say. Anyone who criticizes him is dismissed as just being the purveyor of fake news. So I think that's really kind of, in some sense, hurt the political debate, because there isn't even a factual base that people can agree to start the debate with. It just seems like it's just assertion and counter assertion. So it's been a very hard time, I think, for people across the country. And it's interesting the divisions that have broken out, because of course there's the classic and obvious division between Democrats and Republicans. I think there's actually kind of an interesting division between Washington and New York. Washington representing the policy community. And even though Republicans on Capitol Hill are still supportive of Trump, privately, they don't like his leadership style. They think it's just way too divisive, way too undisciplined. So I think the policy community in Washington is still very, very concerned about Trump. And yet when you talk to people in the financial markets in New York, they like him. And they, in a way that really surprises me, tend to discount all of these kind of inflammatory comments as just mere rhetoric, and they're just very, very hopeful that he's going to, in the end, deliver some policy results they want, including major tax cuts, cutting lots of regulations, perhaps a large infrastructure program to boost spending. So they're totally focused on what they hope will be the result. I think Washington is focused on the process by which policy is being debated. And then as I talk to others...
Has he delivered anything yet?
Well, to be fair to him, it's early. It's only 50 or 60 days into the presidency as we're talking, and big things are coming. It seems, whether they're good for the country or not is debatable. But the healthcare debate has begun. It's intense, and there's a real Republican effort to dismantle the major landmark law of President Obama's presidency, the Affordable Care Act. And that's moving forward actually probably too quickly. I mean, it seems like they're so determined to get this done early in the year. They're not really inclined to slow down and make sure they're doing it right for a law that will affect 1/6 or 1/7 of the economy. They're moving aggressively on tax reform.
But they are good at talking about rubbing out, doing something with existing systems, but we haven't seen very much what they will put there instead of the existing systems.
That's very fair, and so that's but again, it's 50 days in, and even for those who are critical, will say give them. Most of his team is not even in place. I mean, he hasn't made appointments to a lot of key positions. The confirmation in the Senate is going slowly. So there's. His leadership style is much more apparent than what policy prescriptions he's going to argue for. So that's where we're at. So I think that I think people are mostly reacting to his leadership style as opposed to his particular policies, although there's a lot of reservations about those as well.
What can you say about his team, the team around Trump, which is beginning to be formed now? Last time we asked ourselves, who are his friends?
Yeah.
Who are his friends now?
Well, it's a very strange group of people in the sense that they're not, for the most part, he has a White House team that has some very, very controversial people in it. Not many have experience in governance. His cabinet selections are, particularly on the foreign policy front, tend to have strong kind of centrist to the right of center, but within the mainstream national security credentials, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the new National Security Advisor, they're within the mainstream, and they seem basically grounded, reasonable people. But he has people like his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is a very, very controversial person. His Director of the Environment is extremely controversial in the sense of having opposed the APA when he was a state official in Oklahoma. So it's a very mixed group of people. Trump seems to, his daughters and her husband are part of the inner circle. They have no real particular policy expertise, but they're people that he can trust and rely on. So I think it's part of his leadership style. He likes to have people around him that he respects personally and can trust personally, much more so than people with policy expertise. He wants to have, people around him that he's comfortable with.
Your system here, your basic constitution builds on checks and balances between the Supreme Court, Congress, and the presidency. Does it work in a situation like this?
We're going to find out. We're going to find out. I think a lot of people are concerned that particularly concerning some of the allegations about the Russian government and the Trump campaign and the Trump transition. This is a serious national security issue, and it should be something that lawmakers from both parties really want to get to the bottom of because it affects our democracy. And yet, it's unclear if that kind of probing examination is going to occur. It's been these probes have been sent off to the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. Both of them are chaired by conservative Republicans who have sort of signaled that they will take their time in this inquiry, and it's hard to know. But it's certainly the House Intelligence Chairman seems extremely pro-Trump, and it seems very, very unlikely that he's going to conduct a searching examination. So a lot of our basic institutions, will they stand up to someone like Trump? I don't know. There isn't, and this is maybe a critical point, Trump is very popular among Republicans across the country. So the Republican leaders on Capitol Hill, whatever their private misgivings, are staying pretty loyal to Trump. And I think that is going to continue until unless his popularity among Republicans begins to collapse, at which point they may drop off. So we'll see if our checks and balances works. Right now, the early indications are a little troubling, to be honest.
Yeah, but it is important to note, as you say, that he is still very popular among the people who elected him.
And this is another important point. He is not reaching, I mean, again, Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Trump. She won the popular vote 48 to 46%. Not a sort of almost a decisive popular vote victory, but she did not win it in the right states. And again, she knew what states she needed to win, and she didn't win them. So Trump starts out with a deficit there. And his approval numbers, in the early weeks of his presidency are very, very low by historical standards, in part because he's not reaching out to those that voted for Hillary Clinton or others, but he's just doubling down and trying to agitate his base and keep them aroused. So he hasn't reached out to his opponents and tried to bring them in, apart from the most glancing of references. And it's striking that even his address before the joint session of Congress, he made, I thought, just the most perfunctory references to Democrats and invitations to work together. And that excited this great sense of, oh my God, he's a statesman, he wants to work with the other party. And I guess in contrast to his inaugural speech, which was very, very hard line, this was considered more moderate. So the point that strikes me is that the bar is really lowering on Trump, and anything that he does that is even moderately conciliatory is greeted with great enthusiasm, because that's just not his leadership style.
The president has named the media, the newspapers, radio, television, and the internet pages and so on, the number one enemy of the American people. How does it feel being a journalist working in that atmosphere?
It's. I think some of the reporters who cover the White House maybe feel more threatened than reporters covering Congress like myself. He clearly has decided to wage an attack on the press. As others have noted, Trump is one of these people who needs to have an enemy. And he doesn't have, Hillary Clinton to run against right now, so he needs to have an enemy. And the press is, a convenient and obvious one. And the American people have deep reservations about the American press corps. And so, it's not hard for him to get applause when he attacks the press.
Right. It's a popular attack.
It's a popular attack. So I don't know. I think with reporters, he's a hard person to cover because he doesn't follow the basic conventions of releasing information that is grounded in factual analysis. The classic example is just his recent allegation that President Obama, had his Trump Towers wiretapped during the campaign. A very, very inflammatory accusation, which has been backed up with zero evidence. And, in another context, this would be considered almost incredible to make that kind of allegation against your predecessor. But for Trump, it's just sort of, you make the allegation, his press office says, well, we don't really have too much more to say about it, then calls on Congress to investigate it as if that is even considered, a viable option. So I don't know where this goes. That's the thing is, I think if I had to sort of summarize the view of the country, it's this sense of after 5 or 6 weeks, it's already exhausting. And how does this go on like this for 4 years? And critically, what happens if there's an international crisis and Trump needs to come to the American people and say, North Korea has accelerated some of their provocative action, we need to move, to do something very profound and controversial, when he has developed this whole baseline of inaccurate statements and falsehoods. How does he rally the country, let alone the world, that has probably even more skepticism about him? So there is this deep sense of exhaustion after 5 weeks. It isn't a sense of excitement that I can tell. And even among my Republican friends, they're loyal to him, but they're saying this is a little scary. This is not, he has not made the transition from candidate to president in the way that they had hoped he would. I think if they speak honestly.
Finally, in my view, I think the role of the media and the journalists is growing in importance in a situation like this. But what does it do to the media people when they are attacked as the number one enemy of the American people?
You know, I think it's probably like a lot of things in life. I think you sometimes have to just kind of filter out a lot of the noise and just focus on your job. And I think, you know, when with Trump being so unusual, sometimes I think the biggest mistake the press could make is trying to sort of answer every charge and sort of, you know, ratchet up the noise level. And I think the most important thing is to continue to do your job and try to find out what's accurate and talk to both sides. And it's not like, you know, both sides get equal weight. I mean, if one side has a completely compelling argument and the other one doesn't, but just to give, you know, factual, balanced information, and hope and trust that it's over time that this is going to be the sort of information that the American people want. I mean, one sort of interesting note that I saw the other day is that we have a public station called the NewsHour, which I'm sure you remember from your time in Washington, and it's considered a very kind of centrist, fact-based, even boring news magazine. It's on for 1 hour in the evenings. Apparently, its ratings have skyrocketed during the early weeks of the Trump presidency because I think there is a hunger for people to just, you know, to kind of tune out the noise and the yelling and the screaming and just to figure out what actually is really going on. So I think as reporters and journalists, we just have to just keep doing our jobs and just not be kind of pulled into the, you know, personal debate about, you know, our role in society. I mean, these are our jobs, and just do it and see what happens.
John, thank you. Let's see what happens.
Thank you. See you, Claes.